your feet are accelerating harder than your head. Before the neutron star looks close, your body has already entered a gravity gradient strong enough to pull it out of shape. Muscle, blood, spine, all beginning to separate into different rates of fall. The descent is not a clean drop. It is sheer. Every second adds velocity, and velocity adds heat, because the space around that dead star is crowded with radiation, particles, and magnetic violence your body cannot cross intact. You are not approaching a surface in any ordinary sense. You are entering a field that starts dismantling you long before impact. The fall feels like motion toward a point, but the physics does not allow a single direction to remain stable. The lower part of your body continues to accelerate more strongly, increasing the difference in force across your length, and that difference produces tension, then structural failure, then separation of material. The effect is not sudden, it builds. Velocity increases because gravity is doing continuous work on your mass, converting potential into kinetic energy. And that energy has to go somewhere as you move through an environment saturated with high-energy particles and intense magnetic fields. Heat rises as collisions multiply. You're not simply getting closer, you are being processed by the approach itself. And once your velocity crosses a certain threshold, turning around is no longer a question of decision. It becomes a question of energy you no longer have. The distance still feels large. The neutron star remains a compact disk ahead of you, small enough to sit within your field of vision, but the forces acting on your body are no longer uniform, and that difference begins to accumulate measurable damage. Your feet are deeper in the gravitational field. That means they are being pulled with greater acceleration than your head, and the result is tension along the length of your body that no biological structure is built to withstand. At first, it feels like weight. Then it becomes stretch. Muscle fibers begin to elongate beyond their normal limits, and blood, which should circulate through a closed loop, starts to redistribute unevenly, pulled downward by differential acceleration. Circulation fails. The heart cannot maintain pressure against a gradient that is increasing second by second. Blood pools. Then it begins to separate. The descent continues. Gravity continues to do work on your mass, and that work increases your velocity, and that velocity increases the rate at which your body interacts with the environment around the neutron star. Particles strike with higher energy. Radiation deposits heat directly into tissue. Temperature rises not because of atmosphere, but because energy transfer is becoming unavoidable. The body absorbs it, then fails to regulate it. Your skin begins to heat unevenly. Areas facing the star receive more energy. Areas facing away receive less. That difference introduces thermal stress on top of mechanical stress. Expansion and contraction no longer match. Structure weakens further. The stretching increases. The difference in acceleration between your feet and your head widens as you move closer, and the force required to keep your body intact rises beyond what connective tissue can supply. Tendons strain. Ligaments fail. The spine, built to carry compressive load, is now subjected to tension along its entire length. It begins to separate at the joints. You are not falling as a single object anymore. You are becoming a distribution of mass, responding independently to the same field. This is the first irreversible change. Your body is no longer behaving as a coherent structure. Gravity has introduced a gradient strong enough to break that coherence before any surface is reached. Velocity continues to rise. There is no plateau. Each meter closer converts more potential energy into motion, and that motion multiplies every interaction with the surrounding radiation field. Heat continues to increase. Not as a gentle warming, but as a direct consequence of kinetic energy being deposited into your body through constant impact at the microscopic level. Cells begin to fail. Proteins denature. Membranes lose integrity. The processes that define living tissue are disrupted, not by lack of oxygen, but by excess energy being forced into them faster than they can dissipate. The body cannot shed this heat. There is no medium to carry it away. Only continuous input. The stretching does not stop. The difference in gravitational pull continues to widen, and eventually the force exceeds the strength of bone. Fractures occur under tension, not compression. Bones separate along their length, pulled apart by the same gradient that first distorted your muscles. You're still moving toward the neutron star, but you are no longer intact. The fall has become a sequence of mechanical failures, each one driven by the same underlying cause: uneven acceleration. The star has not grown larger yet in any meaningful way, but its influence has. And that influence is already enough to dismantle the structure you arrived with. You have not reached the surface. The surface has already reached into you. The distance continues to shrink. Your remaining mass accelerates faster with every second, because gravity is still converting position into motion, and nothing in this environment removes that energy. Velocity climbs. And with velocity, every interaction becomes more violent. Particles that were once background now strike with enough energy to penetrate deeper, depositing momentum and heat into whatever structure remains. The effect compounds. Higher speed increases collision energy. Higher collision energy increases temperature. Higher temperature weakens material further. The chain continues. You are no longer moving through empty space. You are moving through a field of radiation, magnetic flux, and charged particles that cannot be avoided at this speed. Each impact transfers energy. Each transfer raises internal temperature. There is no cooling mechanism, only accumulation. The fragments of your body, already stretched and separated, now begin to heat unevenly, depending on their orientation and cross-section to the incoming flux. Smaller pieces absorb energy faster relative to their mass. They heat more quickly. They fail sooner. Material begins to change phase. Solid structure breaks down into softer, less organized forms. Molecular bonds, already stressed by mechanical stretching, are further weakened by thermal agitation. They begin to break. The distinction between tissue and plasma starts to blur. Velocity continues to increase. You are now moving fast enough that the concept of gentle contact no longer exists. Every encounter is impact. Even sparse particles carry enough energy at this speed to act like microscopic projectiles. They erode structure, layer by layer. The neutron star remains ahead, still compact in appearance, but its gravitational well is doing continuous work, and that work is visible in your increasing speed. There is no stable trajectory at this proximity that allows reversal without an equally extreme input of energy. You would need to remove the kinetic energy you have gained. There is no mechanism available. The fall continues because the energy budget has already committed you to it. Heat builds further. Radiation intensifies. The star's magnetic field channels charged particles into structured flows, and as you intersect these flows, the density of impacts increases. Energy transfer becomes more concentrated. Temperature rises faster. Material response changes. At high enough energy input, electrons are stripped from atoms. Ionization spreads. What remains of structured matter transitions into plasma. a state where individual particles respond directly to electromagnetic forces rather than maintaining stable bonds. You are no longer a collection of tissues. You are becoming a cloud of charged particles moving at high velocity through an extreme field. And that cloud continues to accelerate. The closer you get, the steeper the gravitational gradient becomes. The difference in acceleration across even small distances increases. What was once a body became fragments. Those fragments are now becoming streams. Streams stretched along the direction of fall. Each particle follows its own path, influenced by gravity and electromagnetic fields, but all sharing the same increasing velocity toward the star. There is no intact object left to land. Only matter in motion. The surface ahead has not yet been reached. But the energy of impact is already building inside the motion itself. By the time contact occurs, the distinction between approach and collision will no longer exist. It will be one continuous transfer of energy. The neutron star grows larger now. Not gradually, but with accelerating scale, because your velocity is closing distance faster with every second, and the curvature of the gravitational well steepens the final approach. There is still a surface, but it does not behave like ground. The outer layer of a neutron star is a crust formed under immense pressure, where atomic nuclei are forced into dense, rigid structures packed far beyond anything familiar. This is not material you can compress further. It resists. And resistance at your velocity means energy release. Your incoming stream of particles continues to accelerate, driven by gravity, gaining kinetic energy that has no place to go until contact. That energy accumulates in motion. It does not dissipate. It waits. The distance collapses quickly now. Radiation intensity rises sharply as you enter stronger regions of the magnetic field, where charged particles are funneled into concentrated paths. These paths intersect your trajectory. Impact rates increase again. Energy deposition accelerates. Temperature rises further. What remains of your matter is already in a plasma state, a flow of charged particles stretched along the direction of fall. And that flow is about to meet something that will not yield. Contact does not occur as a gentle arrival. It occurs as deceleration. Extreme deceleration. The particles in your stream, moving at enormous velocity, encounter a surface that halts them over distances so small they are almost negligible. That change in velocity over such a short distance produces immense forces. Force is mass times acceleration. Acceleration in this case is the rapid reduction of velocity to zero relative to the surface. The result is compression. Violent compression. The plasma that once carried your structure is forced into a region where density increases abruptly. Particles collide with the crust. Energy transfers into the material. Heat spikes. Radiation bursts outward. The impact is not a single event. It unfolds across layers of incoming matter, each arriving slightly after the other, each depositing energy into the same region. The surface does not absorb this quietly. It responds. Energy injected into the crust can fracture its structure, triggering localized shifts in the rigid lattice. These shifts release additional energy, not from the incoming matter, but from the stored stresses within the star itself. The collision becomes a coupling. Incoming kinetic energy meets stored structural tension. Both release. Magnetic fields react. Charged particles are redirected. Some energy escapes as high-energy radiation, moving outward from the impact site. Some is driven deeper into the crust, increasing local pressure and temperature further. the distinction between your matter and the star begins to disappear. Your particles are no longer independent. They are being incorporated, forced into the same extreme conditions that define the neutron star's outer layers. Electrons remain stripped. Nuclei are pushed closer together. Interactions are governed by forces that dominate at very short distances. There is no rebound. No scattering back into space at meaningful scale. The gravitational field is too strong. Any particle that does not immediately embed is pulled back again, repeating the process until it loses enough energy to remain. You are not landing. You are being absorbed through successive energy transfers. Each stage removes more of the motion you carried in. Each stage increases the density of what you become. The surface is not a boundary you cross. It is a mechanism that converts your motion into heat, radiation, and structural change within the star. And that mechanism has no capacity to let anything leave once the process has begun. The impact continues inward. The first contact removed velocity through compression, but not all of it, because the incoming stream carried enormous kinetic energy, and that energy must be distributed through layers of material. So the process deepens. Each incoming particle collides, transfers energy, and is forced into a denser region, where the available space between nuclei is already minimal. Pressure rises immediately. Not gradually. Because the crust beneath you is already near its structural limit, and additional energy forces it to reorganize. The mechanism is direct. More incoming energy increases local temperature. Higher temperature increases particle motion. Increased motion forces collisions at shorter distances. Shorter distances raise pressure sharply. The chain feeds itself. The material you have become is no longer free to expand. Gravity confines it. The surrounding crust confines it. So the only direction left is inward compression. Electrons, already stripped during the approach, are pushed into closer interaction with nuclei. At these pressures, electrons are no longer loosely bound clouds. They are forced into states where their behavior changes under extreme confinement. Degeneracy pressure becomes dominant. It resists further compression, but only up to a limit defined by the mass and structure of the star. Your incoming material adds to that pressure, adds to that confinement, adds to the imbalance that must be resolved. The energy you carried in is now being redistributed as heat and radiation within the crust. Temperature spikes locally. This is not surface heating. It is internal energy injection. The crust reacts. Stress builds along rigid structures formed under immense pressure. Those structures can fracture. When they do, they release stored elastic energy accumulated over long periods. The result is a localized quake. A shift. A sudden reconfiguration of the lattice. Your impact becomes part of that event. Energy from your motion combines with energy already present inside the star. The system responds as a whole. Magnetic fields thread through this region. They are anchored to the movement of charged particles. As the crust shifts and the plasma flows, these fields are twisted, stretched, and reconnected. That reconnection releases additional energy. Radiation bursts outward again. Not just from your arrival, but from the star's response to it. The deeper layers exert even more pressure. Below the crust, nuclei are packed into forms that no longer resemble ordinary atomic structure. Neutrons dominate. Matter is compressed to densities where individual particles are forced into proximity that changes the rules of interaction. Your material is being driven toward that regime. Step by step. Each collision removes relative motion. Each removal increases density. Each increase in density changes the state of matter. There is no point where the process pauses. No stable layer where incoming material can remain unchanged. Everything is driven toward equilibrium under extreme pressure. And equilibrium here means compression. Your identity as incoming matter is already gone. The particles that once formed your body are now indistinguishable from the particles already present in the star. They are subject to the same forces. They follow the same constraints. The fall has become transformation. Not a transition across space, but a conversion of energy and structure under conditions that leave no room for anything familiar. The neutron star is not receiving you as an object. It is processing you as energy and matter, forcing both into its existing structure, layer by layer. And deeper inside, the conditions become even more extreme. The neutron star does not act as a single surface. It behaves as a coupled system where gravity, rotation, magnetic structure, and compressed matter all participate in how incoming material is processed. Your fall is now part of that system. The motion you carried in has already been converted into heat, radiation, and structural change, but the system does not isolate those effects. It distributes them. The star is rotating, often rapidly. That rotation drags the surrounding magnetic field with it, creating structured regions where charged particles are forced into defined paths. As your material entered, it did not simply move downward. It was redirected. Charged particles follow magnetic field lines. Those lines curve, twist, and converge towards specific regions on the surface. So the flow of your matter is guided. Not random, but along channels defined by the star's magnetic geometry. This changes how energy is deposited. Instead of spreading evenly, it concentrates. Focused impact regions receive more energy. Higher energy density produces stronger local heating. Stronger heating drives more intense radiation. The system amplifies its own response. Gravity continues to act, even after impact. Material that has not fully settled is pulled again toward lower energy states, sliding along the surface, guided by both gravitational gradients and magnetic constraints. There is no stable resting point at the scale you arrived. Only redistribution. The crust absorbs, then adjusts, then absorbs again. Each addition of matter slightly alters local pressure. That alteration propagates. Stress redistributes across the lattice. If enough imbalance accumulates, another fracture occurs. Another release. The star is not passive. It is continuously rebalancing under the weight of its own compression and any new input. Your fall becomes part of that feedback loop. Rotation adds another layer. Because the star spins, any incoming material inherits that motion. Angular momentum must be conserved. As your particles settle, they are forced to match the rotational velocity of the surface. This requires acceleration in the tangential direction. That acceleration is another transfer of energy, another conversion. Motion is reshaped. From inward fall to lateral rotation. The system absorbs not just your downward velocity, but also imposes its own motion onto you. The magnetic field strengthens this effect. Charged particles moving across field lines experience forces that redirect their paths. They spiral. They align. They lose degrees of freedom. Your motion becomes constrained to the geometry of the field. The result is organized flow, not chaotic debris. but structured streams of plasma being guided, compressed, and integrated. Radiation continues to escape. Energy released from impact, compression, and magnetic reconnection does not remain entirely trapped. It moves outward as high-energy emission. From a distance, this can appear as pulses or bursts, depending on how the rotation and magnetic alignment are oriented relative to an observer. Your fall contributes to that signal. A brief addition to the star's ongoing emission. The neutron star is not defined by a single event. It is defined by continuous processes. Compression, rotation, magnetic interaction, and energy release all operate together. Your arrival is one more input into that system. Not special. Not isolated. Just another conversion of motion into the internal economy of the star. There is no moment where the fall completes. There is only a point where your material is no longer distinguishable from the system that absorbed it. And at that point, the idea of falling into a neutron star has changed meaning. It is no longer about reaching a destination. It is about entering a machine built from the remnants of a collapsed star, where every incoming path ends in the same outcome. Motion is removed. Energy is redistributed. Structure is erased. And the system continues, unchanged in its purpose, ready to process whatever arrives next. The star ahead is stable in appearance. A compact sphere, sharply defined, rotating with quiet precision. But its stability is not the absence of change. It is the result of forces that never stopped acting. The matter beneath its surface is held in place by pressure that was created during a violent collapse, and that pressure remains active, continuously resisting the pull of gravity. The balance is not gentle. Gravity pulls inward. Degeneracy pressure pushes outward. The two are locked. That lock defines the star. Your material, now part of the outer layers, is subject to that same balance. It is no longer free to expand or disperse. It is held in place by the same opposing forces. The structure you entered was not built for you. It was built from the death of a massive star. A star that once fused elements in its core until the fuel ran out. Without fusion, pressure dropped. Gravity took over. The core collapsed. And in that collapse, matter was driven into densities where electrons and protons were forced together, forming neutrons. The process released energy. A supernova followed. Outer layers were expelled. What remained was this core, compressed. Stable only because further collapse is resisted by the quantum behavior of its particles. That history is not separate from your fall. It defines it. The same forces that created the star are the ones acting on your material now. Pressure is not increasing slowly. It is already extreme. Your particles are being integrated into a structure that exists at densities far beyond anything encountered before the approach. There is no gradual adjustment. Only immediate conformity. Temperature within these layers remains high, sustained not by ongoing fusion, but by residual heat and continuous energy input from events like your arrival. Energy does not remain localized. It spreads through conduction and radiation within the crust and into deeper regions. The system redistributes it. The surface may appear quiet from a distance, but internally it is active, constantly adjusting, constantly balancing. The rotation of the star contributes to this stability. Centrifugal effects slightly oppose gravity at the equator, altering how pressure is distributed. Magnetic fields interact with charged particles, influencing how energy moves through the outer layers. Everything is coupled. Nothing acts in isolation. Your material is now part of that coupling. It participates in the same transfers, the same constraints, the same responses. The fall you experienced was only the entry point. The real process is ongoing. Your motion has already been removed. Your energy has been redistributed. What remains is matter under confinement, held in place by forces that were set during a collapse that ended long ago. The star does not remember your arrival. It does not distinguish your particles from its own. It maintains its structure. It continues its rotation. It emits energy. And beneath all of it, the same balance holds. Gravity pressing inward. Degeneracy pressure pushing outward. A system locked in place by opposing forces that never stop acting. And anything that enters it becomes part of that balance. The star remains fixed ahead in appearance, but your position relative to it is no longer something you can control, because the velocity you gain during descent has already defined your trajectory. That trajectory curbs inward. Gravity has increased your speed continuously, and with that speed comes kinetic energy that must be removed to escape. The requirement is precise. To reverse direction, you would need to supply energy equal to what gravity has already given you, plus additional energy to climb back out of the well. There is no mechanism available. Your material, now spread and integrated into the outer layers, cannot generate thrust. It cannot store or release energy in a directed way. It cannot reassemble. The path inward is enforced by energy balance. The closer you move, the deeper the well becomes. The deeper the well, the more energy is required to leave. The relationship is not linear. Each unit of distance closer demands disproportionately more energy to escape. This creates a boundary in practice. Not a wall, but a condition where reversal becomes physically unattainable. Even before contact, that condition has already been crossed. The rotation of the star adds complexity. If you approach with any sideways motion, that motion becomes part of your path, turning straight descent into a curved trajectory. Angular momentum is conserved. You begin to spiral. The closer you get, the faster that sideways motion becomes, because the radius of your path decreases. This increases rotational speed. An increased speed increases kinetic energy again. Now escape requires cancelling both inward velocity and rotational motion. Two components, both large, both increasing. Magnetic fields reinforce this confinement. Charged particles moving through these fields experience forces that redirect their motion along field lines. These lines do not lead outward freely. They loop. They connect surface regions. They trap motion into structured paths that keep material near the star. Energy is not only insufficient, the available pathways for motion are constrained. Even if a particle momentarily moves outward, gravity pulls it back, and magnetic forces redirect it. The result is capture. Not by a single force, but by the combination of gravitational pull, rotational motion, and electromagnetic constraint. The environment does not offer a route of least resistance away from the star. It offers routes that cycle motion back into it. Your material is now part of those cycles. It moves along the surface. It follows magnetic channels. It is pulled inward where possible. It cannot gather the coordinated energy needed to leave. The idea of turning around belongs to objects that remain intact, with stored energy and control over direction. Those conditions no longer exist. You are not a single object. You are a distribution of particles embedded in a system that dissipates directed motion. Energy is continuously converted. Kinetic to thermal. Thermal to radiation. Radiation to outward emission. But none of these conversions restore organized motion in a single direction. They remove it. The fall was not just movement toward the star. It was a one-way conversion of motion into forms that cannot be reversed. By the time the surface was reached, the possibility of escape had already been eliminated. The path inward was never a choice. It was a consequence of entering a field that removes the conditions required to leave. And once those conditions are gone, the concept of going back no longer applies. The surface appears stable again. A rigid layer rotating, holding its shape under immense gravity. But stability here is maintained by continuous resistance to compression, not by absence of force. Every particle inside the outer layers is under pressure that would crush ordinary matter instantly. That pressure defines how matter behaves. Your material, already stripped of structure, is now forced to exist under these conditions. It cannot remain in any familiar arrangement. The mechanism is direct. High pressure reduces the space between particles. Reduced space increases interaction strength. Stronger interaction changes the state of matter. Electrons, already separated from nuclei during earlier heating, are confined into a dense, degenerate sea. They are no longer associated with individual atoms. They exist as a collective. Their behavior is governed by quantum constraints that prevent them from occupying the same states. That resistance produces pressure. Degeneracy pressure. It supports the crust against further collapse. But it also defines how new material integrates. Your incoming particles join this system. They are forced into available states. No expansion is possible. Only compression. Nuclei themselves are affected. Under sufficient pressure, their structure begins to distort. Protons and neutrons are packed closer together. At deeper layers, the distinction between individual nuclei becomes less meaningful. Matter transitions toward configurations where neutrons dominate. The path is gradual, but the direction is fixed. Increasing density. Decreasing separation. The energy introduced during your fall has already been distributed through these layers. Heat spreads, but not evenly. Regions of higher energy input experience higher local temperatures, increasing particle motion and altering local pressure balance. The system responds. Energy flows outward through radiation. It also flows inward through conduction. The star continuously redistributes the imbalance. There is no accumulation without response. The outer layers adjust. They settle into new equilibrium states. Your material becomes part of that equilibrium. Not as an identifiable addition, but as a contribution to density and pressure. Rotation continues. Magnetic fields continue to guide charged particles. Even within this dense environment, electromagnetic forces influence how matter moves at small scales. Charged particles follow paths. Energy transfer follows structure. Nothing is random. Everything is constrained. The deeper you consider the system, the less it resembles an object, and the more it resembles a condition. A set of rules imposed by extreme gravity and compression. The neutron star is not simply made of matter. It is a state that matter is forced into. Your fall did not bring you to a place. It brought your material into compliance with that state. And within that state, change is slow. But it never stops. Pressure continues to act. Energy continues to move. Structure continues to adjust. The system holds. Because every component is already operating at the limit allowed by the forces present, and anything added to it is immediately drawn into that same balance. The star still appears as a boundary, a surface separating space from something denser beneath. But the distinction does not hold under closer inspection, because what you called the surface is only the outermost layer of a compressed stellar core. The structure extends inward, continuously. There is no transition to something familiar, only increasing density. The matter beneath the crust is not arranged into atoms. It is arranged by pressure. Nuclei are forced so close that their identities begin to merge into extended structures, regions where neutrons dominate and individual boundaries lose meaning. The behavior is not chemical. It is governed by the strong force and extreme confinement. Your material, already integrated into the outer layers, is part of this gradient. It is being drawn toward deeper equilibrium. That movement is not fast in the sense of free fall. It is controlled by pressure and interaction. But it is inevitable. Energy from your arrival has already been absorbed. The system now seeks balance. Balance requires redistribution. Redistribution requires movement inward, where pressure is higher. The star you approached is not a surface object. It is exposed interior. A core that once existed inside a massive star, now revealed after collapse removed the outer layers. Everything you encountered on the way in, stretching, heating, ionization, impact, was only the outer response of that interior being in direct contact with space. The fall did not end at the surface. It entered the core. The concept of falling changes here. There is no longer a meaningful direction of down in the human sense. There is only movement toward higher pressure states. Your particles follow gradients, not paths. They move from lower density regions to higher density regions, driven by the same forces that shape the star. The system is layered, but those layers are not separate environments. They are continuous transitions. Each deeper region imposes stronger constraints. Shorter distances between particles, higher interaction energy. Different. The outer crust was rigid. Beneath it, matter flows differently. Not freely, but under constraints that allow slow rearrangement. Neutron-rich regions shift under pressure. Structures form and dissolve. Your material participates. Indistinguishable. The star does not absorb in a single moment. It integrates over time. And that time is governed by internal processes, not by the motion you brought with you. The fall you experienced was rapid. The integration is slow. But both are parts of the same system. The neutron star is not a place you reached. It is a condition you entered. A condition where matter no longer behaves according to familiar rules, and where the idea of a surface was only ever an approximation of something far deeper. The star appears steady from a distance. A compact sphere holding its shape against its own gravity. But its rotation introduces continuous motion across every layer, and that motion does not stop at the surface. It extends through the crust and into the interior. Your material, now part of the outer regions, cannot remain stationary relative to space. It is forced to match the rotation. The mechanism is direct. As particles settle into the crust, they are accelerated tangentially to align with the star's spin. This requires energy transfer. Not optional. Mandatory. Any mismatch between incoming motion and rotational motion is corrected by forces within the material and the magnetic field. Acceleration occurs sideways. Velocity increases in a direction that was not part of the original fall. The result is shear. Material at slightly different depths rotates at slightly different speeds. Those differences produce friction. Friction converts motion into heat. Heat alters pressure. Pressure alters structure. The chain continues. Magnetic fields reinforce the process. Charged particles are not free to move in arbitrary directions. They spiral along field lines. Those lines are anchored to the rotating star. As the star spins, the field drags the particles with it. This introduces additional forces that guide motion into structured paths. Your material becomes part of these flows. Not a static layer, but a moving component in a rotating system. The faster the rotation, the stronger these effects. Some neutron stars spin many times each second. At those rates, the surface velocity becomes significant. Centrifugal effects slightly counteract gravity at the equator, changing how pressure is distributed across the star. This creates variation. Different regions experience different balances of force. Your material adapts to those variations. It settles where the balance allows. It moves where the balance shifts. There is no fixed position, only dynamic equilibrium. Energy continues to redistribute. The heat generated by friction and motion flows outward and inward. Radiation escapes from the surface. Conduction carries energy deeper into the star. The system maintains itself through continuous adjustment. Nothing remains unchanged. The fall that brought your material here has ended as motion. But motion has not ended as a process. It has been transformed. From downward velocity into rotational alignment. From linear descent into circular flow. The star does not simply absorb incoming matter. It reorganizes it into its existing patterns. Rotation is one of those patterns. It defines how matter moves once it becomes part of the system. And once your material has been drawn into that pattern, it cannot leave it. Because leaving would require breaking the same constraints that now define its motion. Constraints imposed by gravity, pressure, and the structure of the star itself. The fall is over. The motion continues. In a form you did not bring with you. The neutron star does not remain isolated in practice. Even when it appears alone, it exists inside an environment where matter can drift close enough to be captured. And once that capture begins, the same chain you experienced starts again. Gravity pulls. Velocity increases. Energy accumulates. But when the incoming material is more extended, gas, dust, or matter from a nearby star, the process does not begin as a direct fall. It begins as a flow. Material enters the gravitational field with some sideways motion. That motion prevents immediate impact. Instead, it forms a rotating structure around the star. A disk. The disk is not stable. Friction acts within it. Particles collide. Energy is converted from ordered motion into heat. Heat increases pressure within the disk. Pressure drives some material outward. But gravity pulls more inward. The system evolves. The inner regions of the disk move faster. The outer regions move slower. This difference in velocity creates shear. Shear produces more friction. Friction produces more heat. The chain repeats. Material gradually loses energy. As it loses energy, it moves closer to the star. spiral inward. Not a fall, a controlled loss of motion. Your descent was rapid because you entered directly. In a disk, the same outcome is reached through gradual energy removal, but the result is identical. Velocity increases near the inner edge. Temperature rises sharply. Radiation intensifies. The inner disk becomes a region where matter is heated to extreme levels before it ever touches the surface. When that material finally reaches the star, it arrives with high velocity and high temperature. The impact follows the same mechanism: deceleration, compression, energy release, integration. The star does not need to search for matter. Its gravitational field ensures that anything that comes close enough will be processed. The rate depends on supply, but the mechanism does not change. Magnetic fields can disrupt the disk. If the field is strong, it channels incoming material along specific paths, pulling it out of the disk and guiding it directly onto the surface. These paths concentrate energy. Localized regions receive intense input. Radiation increases. Pulses can form as the star rotates, sweeping these regions through space. The system produces signals, not by intention, but as a consequence of how it processes incoming matter. Your fall was one instance, a direct path. The disk is another, a slower path. Both end the same way. Motion is removed. Energy is redistributed. Matter is forced into the same confined state. The neutron star operates continuously, not as a static object, but as a system that draws in, converts, and integrates whatever enters its influence. There is no pause, only ongoing transfer. And any path that leads inward, whether fast or slow, is resolved by the same physical chain that began the moment gravity first increased your speed. The surface remains active, not through visible motion, but through continuous transfer of energy across layers that cannot remain uneven for long. When incoming material deposits heat during impact, that energy does not stay confined to the point of arrival. It spreads. The mechanism is direct. Higher temperature increases particle motion. Increased motion increases interaction rates. Those interactions pass energy from one region to the next. Conduction carries energy inward. Radiation carries energy outward. Both processes operate at the same time. Neither is optional. The crust redistributes. Hot regions cool by transferring energy to cooler regions. Cooler regions warm as they receive it. The system moves toward equilibrium. But equilibrium here is not stillness. It is a balance of continuous flow. Your material contributed to that flow. The energy from your fall entered the system as localized heating. That heat moved. It spread through the lattice of compressed matter. It altered local pressure. It adjusted how forces were balanced in that region. The adjustment propagated. Not instantly, but steadily. Deeper layers receive energy through conduction. Those layers are already under higher pressure. Adding energy increases particle motion slightly, which can change how tightly matter is packed. Even small changes matter, because the system operates near limits. Outward, radiation escapes. High-energy photons carry energy away from the surface. This emission is not uniform. It depends on where energy is deposited and how the magnetic field structures the surface. Regions with higher input emit more strongly. As the star rotates, those regions sweep through space. An observer would see pulses, not because the star turns on and off, but because energy release is directional. Your fall added a brief increase to that emission. A small change, quickly absorbed into the ongoing output. Nothing remains isolated. Every input becomes part of the larger energy budget. The star adjusts. It does not store energy indefinitely. It moves it. Always. Temperature gradients flatten over time. Pressure differences are corrected. The structure remains intact because these corrections happen continuously. If they did not, imbalance would grow. The crust would fail more dramatically. The system prevents that through constant redistribution. Your material is now embedded in this process. It contributes to conduction. It contributes to pressure. It is no longer distinguishable. Not in position. Not in energy. Not in identity. The fall introduced energy. The star converted it. Now it is part of a steady state where energy enters, moves, and leaves. There is no input without response, and no part of the star remains unaffected by the flow of energy passing through it. The star holds its form. Dense, compact, rotating under its own gravity, sustained by pressure that resists further collapse. But this outcome is not inevitable for every massive star. It is one branch in a set of possibilities defined by mass and pressure balance. If the original star had been smaller, the collapse would have stopped earlier. Gravity would have been weaker. Degeneracy pressure from electrons alone would have been enough to halt compression. The result would be a white dwarf. Larger than a neutron star. Less dense. Matter still arranged into nuclei and electrons. Your fall into that object would have followed a different chain. Lower acceleration. Lower velocity. Different energy transfer. But still no escape once the well was deep enough. If the original star had been more massive, the collapse would not have stopped here. Gravity would have continued to compress matter beyond the point where neutron pressure could resist it. There would be no stable crust, no rigid outer layer. The result would be a black hole, a region where escape velocity exceeds the speed of light. In that case, the chain of events changes again. Not in the beginning, but in the end. The approach still stretches, still heats, still accelerates. But the final stage removes any path for energy to leave. Everything continues inward. The neutron star sits between these outcomes. It is a limit. A balance point where collapse has gone far enough to compress matter into neutron-dominated states, but not far enough to remove all resistance. This balance defines everything you experienced. The stretching was extreme, but not infinite. The impact was catastrophic, but it occurred on a surface that exists. The energy you carried was released, redistributed, and partially emitted. The system processed it. That processing depends on the star remaining stable, on pressure continuing to oppose gravity. Your fall is now part of that balance. It adds mass. Slightly. That addition changes the system. Small increases in mass increase gravitational pull. Stronger gravity increases pressure throughout the star. The response is immediate. The structure adjusts. Density increases slightly. The balance shifts. If enough mass is added over time, the limit can be crossed. Degeneracy pressure would no longer be sufficient. Collapse would resume. The star would change category. Your fall is too small to cause that. But it contributes. It becomes part of a cumulative process that defines the long-term evolution of the object. The neutron star is not fixed forever. It exists in a range defined by its mass. Below one limit, it remains stable. Above another, it cannot. Everything that falls into it participates in that equation. The fall you experienced is not only an event, it is an addition to a system that is always close to its constraints. And those constraints determine what the star is allowed to remain. The star continues to rotate. The surface continues to emit. The internal pressure continues to balance gravity. But these processes do not occur over brief intervals. They extend across immense spans of time, where each small addition of mass and energy becomes part of a long sequence of adjustments. Your fall was rapid, measured in moments. The consequences of that fall persist far longer. Energy deposited during impact has already spread through the outer layers, but the redistribution continues, moving deeper, smoothing gradients, adjusting pressure across regions that respond slowly due to their density. The mechanism does not stop. Higher pressure regions resist change more strongly. Lower pressure regions adjust more easily. The differences create slow flows, not visible motion, but continuous rearrangement of matter under constraint. Rotation gradually changes as well. Adding mass can alter angular momentum. Even small contributions affect how the star spins over long durations. The change is subtle, but cumulative. The magnetic field evolves alongside it. Field lines anchored in moving matter shift over time. Energy stored in those fields can be released in sudden events when stress builds beyond a threshold. Your arrival contributed energy. That energy becomes part of a larger budget that the star distributes across its lifetime. Radiation carries energy away. Slowly. Constantly. The star cools over time as it emits. But cooling does not eliminate structure. It changes internal conditions. Temperature drops. Particle motion decreases. But pressure remains dominated by degeneracy, not heat. The balance persists even as energy leaves. The system evolves, not toward rest, but toward different internal states. Over long periods, the star can accumulate material from its surroundings. Each addition increases mass. Each increase brings it closer to limits defined by pressure and gravity. The boundary between stability and further collapse remains present, not as an immediate threat, but as a condition that defines the future. Your fall is part of that timeline, not as a distinct memory, but as a contribution to mass, energy, and structure. The event has ended. The integration continues. The neutron star does not pause to mark what has entered it. It incorporates, adjusts, emits, and continues its existence across spans of time that extend far beyond any single moment of descent. The fall was brief. The consequences are not. And within that extended process, the distinction between event and state disappears. Everything becomes part of the same continuous evolution. The star remains where it was. A compact object in space, rotating, emitting, holding its structure under immense pressure. But the meaning of falling toward it has changed. The motion you began with was not a simple descent through empty space toward a surface. It was the beginning, of a chain. Gravity increased velocity. Velocity increased energy transfer. Energy transfer produced heat and structural failure. Failure removed coherence. Coherence loss turned a body into particles. Particles entered a field that redirected, compressed, and integrated them. At no point did the process resemble arrival in the ordinary sense. There was no stage where intact motion met a stable boundary and stopped. Every stage replaced the previous one. The approach became deformation. Deformation became heating. Heating became ionization. Ionization became plasma flow. Flow became impact. Impact became compression. Compression became integration. Each step followed directly from the last. No step could be skipped. No step could be reversed. The surface you imagined was only one part of that chain. A region where velocity was removed rapidly and energy was released. But the process had already removed the conditions required for anything like survival or control long before that point. Your fall did not end at the surface. It ended when motion ceased to exist as directed movement. After that, there was only redistribution. The neutron star did not receive you as an object. It absorbed your motion, your energy, and your material, and forced all of it into a structure defined by forces that never relax. Gravity continues to press inward. Degeneracy pressure continues to resist. Rotation continues to impose motion. Magnetic fields continue to guide charged particles. Energy continues to move. Nothing stops. The system does not need to change for your fall to be complete. It only needs to continue what it was already doing. And once your motion has been removed, once your energy has been spread, once your material has been integrated, there is no remaining distinction between what was falling and what was already there. The fall was not a path you travelled. It was a process that removed you from the category of traveller entirely. And within that system, there is no remaining direction that leads back out. The approach began with motion. Position changed. Distance decreased. It felt like movement toward an object that could be reached and then left. But the physical chain removed those conditions early. Gravity increased your velocity. That increase stored energy in motion. The closer you moved, the more energy was added. And that energy had to be removed to reverse direction. Removal required a mechanism. There was none. The gradient across your body produced tension. Tension produced failure. Failure removed structural integrity. Without structure, coordinated motion could not be maintained. Without coordinated motion, directed escape could not be produced. At the same time, velocity increased interactions with the surrounding environment. Particles transferred energy into your material. Temperature rose. Rising temperature weakened bonds. Weakening bonds accelerated disintegration. Disintegration increased surface area. Increased surface area increased energy absorption. The chain reinforced itself. By the time the surface was near, the system had already removed the capacity to act as a single object. Impact completed the removal of remaining motion. Deceleration converted velocity into heat and radiation. Compression forced matter into the structure of the star. Integration followed. Each step reduced the degrees of freedom available to your material. Before the fall, motion was free. After the fall, motion was constrained. Constrained motion cannot produce escape. The magnetic field added further restriction. Charged particles were forced along defined paths. Those paths did not lead outward. They looped. They connected regions of the surface. They guided motion into the system. Any outward component of motion was reduced by gravity and redirected by electromagnetic forces. The result was confinement. Not by a barrier, but by a combination of forces that removed all available escape trajectories. Energy continued to change form. Kinetic became thermal. Thermal became radiation. Radiation left the system, but the matter remained. There is no process within this chain that reconstructs directed motion once it has been converted. There is only redistribution. The phrase "no escape" is not a statement about a war. It is a statement about the absence of physical pathways that restore the conditions needed to leave. Those conditions were removed step by step, long before the surface, long before integration. They were removed as soon as the gradient, velocity, and energy transfer exceeded what structure and energy storage could support. The fall did not trap you at the end. It removed the possibility of leaving at the beginning. And everything that followed was the system completing that outcome through the same continuous chain of cause and effect. The star remains in balance. Gravity continues to pull inward. Degeneracy pressure continues to resist. Rotation continues to move the outer layers. Magnetic fields continue to guide charged particles. These processes do not pause. They do not adjust in response to a single fall. They operate continuously, defined by the mass and structure of the star itself. Your material is now part of that structure. It contributes to pressure. It contributes to density. It participates in energy transfer, but it does not introduce a new process. It is absorbed into existing ones. The system treats all incoming matter the same way. Motion is removed. Energy is redistributed. Structure is forced into the same confined state. There is no accumulation of identity, no preserved boundary, no remaining distinction. The outer layers adjust slightly to the added mass. Pressure increases by a small amount. That increase propagates inward. The system responds by redistributing forces. Equilibrium is restored. This happens continuously, not as a single correction, but as an ongoing adjustment to every change. Radiation continues to leave the surface. Heat generated from impacts, internal movement, and magnetic activity flows outward. This energy loss slowly alters the star over long timescales. Temperature decreases, but pressure remains. Because pressure is not sustained by heat. It is sustained by the quantum behavior of particles under extreme confinement. The system evolves, but it does not relax into something familiar. It remains extreme. It remains constrained. Everything within it follows the same rules. Your fall is no longer an event within the system. It is part of the system. The motion that defined it has been removed. The energy that powered it has been distributed. The matter that carried it has been integrated. What remains is participation. Participation in pressure. Participation in rotation. Participation in energy flow. The star continues exactly as before. Because the processes that define it do not depend on individual arrivals. They depend on the balance between gravity and the forces that resist it. And that balance remains intact, unchanged in purpose, continuous in operation, indifferent to what becomes part of it. The star still presents a surface, a visible edge, a place where brightness changes and structure appears to begin. But that edge does not mark a true boundary between separate states. It marks a transition in density and behaviour. Outside, matter can move freely. Inside, motion is constrained by pressure and interaction. The transition between these conditions is not abrupt. It is enforced by gradients. As incoming material approaches, density increases. As density increases, interaction rates rise. As interactions rise, energy transfer becomes unavoidable. Each step removes freedom of motion. Each step increases confinement. By the time the surface is reached, the transition has already occurred. The material is no longer behaving as it did outside. The edge you see is not where change begins. It is where change becomes visible. Your fall crossed that transition long before contact. Velocity increased interaction. Interaction increased heat. Heat altered structure. Structure failed. Failure led to new forms of matter. Those forms were already part of the star's regime. The surface did not transform you. The approach did. The crust simply completed the process. This is why no escape exists. Not because of a final barrier, but because the transition removes the conditions required for independent motion before any boundary is reached. Once motion becomes constrained, reversal requires restoring those conditions. That restoration is not possible within the system. Energy has already been converted. Structure has already been altered. The path outward is not blocked. It is undefined. There is no sequence of interactions that rebuilds what was lost. The neutron star does not need to trap you. It changes the rules under which you exist. And once those rules apply, the idea of crossing back into the previous state no longer corresponds to any available physical process. The boundary you imagined was never the place where escape failed. It was only the point where the system's influence became impossible to ignore. Everything that mattered happened before you reached it. And everything after it is simply the continuation of the same conditions, deeper, denser, and more constrained than before. The fall began with direction. A path inward. A velocity that increased with every moment. That velocity carried energy. And that energy defined everything that followed. But once that energy was transferred into heat, radiation, and internal motion, it could not be gathered again into a single direction. The mechanism is irreversible. Kinetic energy, organized into a clear path, becomes thermal energy, distributed across many particles. Thermal energy spreads. It disperses through interaction. It does not reconverge into ordered motion without an external system to direct it. No such system exists here. The neutron star removes order. It replaces it with distribution. Each collision during the approach scattered motion into smaller components. Each transfer of energy increased randomness. Each increase in randomness reduced the ability of matter to move as a single unit. By the time your material reached the surface, the original motion was gone. Not slowed. Not stored. Converted. And once converted, it followed different rules. Heat flows from hot regions to cooler ones. Radiation escapes where it can. Particles move under constraint. None of these processes rebuild directed motion. They dissolve it. The deeper layers reinforce this. Higher pressure reduces available states for particles. Movement becomes limited, constrained. Any remaining motion is local, small scale. It cannot coordinate across the system. Without coordination, there is no escape trajectory. The system does not allow large-scale reorganization into outward motion. It only allows small-scale adjustments toward equilibrium. Even radiation, which leaves the star, does not carry matter with it. It carries energy. The matter remains confined. The conversion is complete. Motion became heat. Heat became radiation. Radiation left. Matter stayed. There is no reverse path. No sequence where radiation reassembles into matter with the same organized velocity. No process where heat gathers into a single directed flow. The original motion is not hidden. It is gone. The fall did not end when you reached the star. It ended when the last trace of directed motion was removed from your material. After that, there was no longer anything that could be described as falling. Only matter participating in the continuous redistribution of energy inside a system that does not preserve the paths that enter it. The fall began with a clear sense of direction. Down was toward the star. Up was away from it. Those directions were defined by your motion and your frame of reference. But the system you entered does not preserve those distinctions. Gravity does not create a single downward path. It creates a gradient, a continuous change in potential that drives motion toward higher density and lower energy states. Once your structure failed and your motion was redistributed, direction lost its meaning as a single path. Your material no longer moves as one. It moves as many particles responding to local conditions. Some move inward. Some shift sideways along the surface. Some follow magnetic field lines. Some contribute to slow rearrangement deeper inside. There is no unified trajectory. Without a unified trajectory, there is no meaningful down. There is only movement along gradients of pressure, energy, and constraint. The surface you reached does not define a floor. It defines a region where forces change behavior. Below it, pressure dominates more strongly. Above it, motion was freer. But neither region supports the idea of standing, landing, or turning. Those concepts require stable surfaces and intact bodies. Neither condition exists here. Rotation further removes directional clarity. As the star spins, every point on its surface is in motion. Any local direction is constantly changing relative to space. A path that seems outward in one moment is redirected in the next. Magnetic fields add another layer. They define preferred paths for charged particles, but those paths are curved, looping, and constrained. They do not align with simple inward or outward directions. They define motion in relation to the field, not in relation to a human sense of up and down. Your material follows those paths. It cannot choose otherwise. The fall you experienced depended on direction, but the system you entered replaces direction with condition. Condition determines motion. Pressure gradients, energy gradients, field structures. These define how matter moves. Not up, not down, only toward equilibrium. The idea of falling into a neutron star suggests a journey along a line. What actually occurs is entry into a region where lines dissolve into fields, where motion is no longer described by a path, but by responses to forces acting at every point. And once that shift happens, the language of direction no longer describes what is happening. It becomes an approximation that no longer matches the system you are part of. The star remains active, not in bursts or isolated events, but through continuous processes that do not reach an endpoint. Gravity continues to apply force. Pressure continues to resist. Rotation continues to impose motion. Magnetic fields continue to guide charged particles. Energy continues to move. These are not stages. They are ongoing conditions. Your fall had a beginning. It had a sequence. It had an endpoint where motion as a single path was removed. But the system you entered does not share that structure. It does not begin. It does not end. It persists. The energy you carried in has already been distributed. Some of it left as radiation. Some of it remains as heat within the star. That heat will continue to move slowly across layers, contributing to the star's long-term emission. The matter you carried in has already been integrated. It contributes to density. It contributes to pressure. It participates in the balance that defines the star. But it does not mark a conclusion. There is no final state where the system settles and stops. There is only continuous adjustment. Over time, additional matter may fall in. Each arrival repeats the same chain. Acceleration. Heating. Impact. Integration. Each event adds to the system. Each addition is absorbed. The processes do not change. They continue to operate under the same physical rules. The neutron star is defined by these rules, not by the events that occur within it. Your fall was one instance of those rules in action. Once complete, it leaves no separate trace. Only a contribution to the ongoing state. The idea of an ending belongs to the observer, to a narrative that follows a single path from start to finish. The system does not follow that pattern. It does not track individual entries. It does not preserve sequences. It maintains balance continuously. The fall concluded for you when motion was removed and structure was erased. But the system did not conclude. It continued without interruption. And it will continue, processing energy and matter, as long as the balance between gravity and pressure remains intact. There is no final moment where it stops. Only a condition that persists. The star is still there. A compact sphere, rotating, emitting, holding itself together through forces that never relax. Nothing about it suggests what just happened. No mark. No boundary. No visible trace of the fall. The motion that carried you in has already been removed. The energy that defined it has already been spread and partly released. The matter that held it has already been folded into the same compressed structure as everything else inside. There is no point you can return to, because there is no longer a path that exists. What you called falling was never a simple descent toward a place. It was a chain of conversions. Position into velocity. Velocity into heat. Heat into radiation. Structure into confinement. Each step removed something required to leave, until nothing remained that could. The star did not close behind you. It did not trap you at the end. It changed the conditions at the beginning. And once those conditions were gone, the idea of escape stopped corresponding to any physical process that could occur. The system continues. Gravity still pulls. Pressure still resists. Energy still moves. And within that balance, your arrival is no longer an event. It is part of the structure. Indistinguishable. Irreversible. Complete.